Hello and welcome to the Dot Connector videocast. Well, the most important aspect in understanding world events, or virtually anything else, is context. You can look at things in and of themselves, a happening, a situation, a subject, and it looks a certain way. But put them into context, how they connect with other things, or what the real reason for them happening really is. And those apparently individual happening subjects look very different and can be seen from a completely different angle. And this whole theme can be seen in a single news item this week regarding the inability and the gathering inability to buy a home in relation to young people, and increasingly, as this story says, older and older people are struggling to buy a home. Now, I've been on a world speaking tour since the summer of 2016. And I have a checklist when I go into a country, a checklist of what I know is the global agenda meant to happen in every country. And I have this checklist of those things. And when I go into a country, I do the research in the week before I speak. And it's incredible how in country after country, you tick off the same things. And among them has been the difficulty, the increasing difficulty in people, particularly the young, but as I say, getting older and older all the time, of people buying a home, and the move to smaller and smaller homes, even down to what they're now calling micro homes, which is basically, so tiny it's astonishing that it could be thought that anyone could live there. And so this is the story, and then I'm going to put this into its real context in terms of why it's happening. The headline is End of Home Owning Dream. 20 years ago, 2/3 of average earners aged up to 34 could afford their own house. Now it's just 1 in 4. And the story goes, home ownership among young people has collapsed in the past 20 years. Like I say, I found this all over the world. Damning figures show today. Sky-high prices and a housing shortage mean that only a quarter of middle earners aged between 25 and 34 now own property. In 1995, 2/3 did. Since the mid-1990s, prices have grown 7 times faster than incomes, denying millions the chance of a place of their own. Campaigners and politicians demanded more house building to tackle the crisis. But, as we'll see, the crisis is manufactured for a particular reason. The collapse in home ownership among people in their 20s and 30s earning average incomes is a social and economic disaster, one politician said. And Robert Colville of the Center for Policy Studies said, the fall in home ownership among young people, and increasingly those in their 30s and 40s, has been one of the most dramatic and damaging shifts in our society and economy in recent decades. Now, that has told us what is happening. But context and true understanding demands that we know why it is happening. There is a global agenda for the mass control of the human race. It's unfolding before our eyes day after day after day, and part of that is to force people to gather in dystopian, vast cities, teeming cities, with people forced into smaller and smaller and smaller homes, these micro homes I talked about, and gathering all those people together in one place. And it's happening all the time. I mean, the urbanization of the world is gathering apace. And that gathering together in one place means that you can keep the population under 24/7 surveillance in what are called smart cities, which is the design of city planned to be completely controlled by AI. And in the all-day talks around the world since the summer of 2016, and indeed before that in the books, I've been talking about the plan to make it more and more difficult for people to buy homes and to own their own place to live. Because the idea is to force people not only into these dystopian cities and these tiny apartments, but to make sure they don't even own them, that they live there at the behest and the dictatorship of the state. You will live how and where we say. So what I'm going to do in this video cast is just play a clip from that World All Day Speaking Tour, which relates to this subject. The last leg of the tour in Maastricht, the Netherlands, was recorded. It's available in full, more than 10 hours of dot connecting at davylight.com. But this is the section where I talk specifically about why it's being made more and more difficult for people to buy homes, starting with the young, yes, but now expanding out into older and older age groups. And one of the people I mention here is someone called Dr. Richard Day. To give you some background, Dr. Richard Day was a big-time Rockefeller family insider who knew what the plan was across the whole spectrum. And in 1969, he addressed a meeting of pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, asked them to turn off recording equipment and to not take notes, because he was going to tell them how the world was going to change, because the network that he was part of, a gopher, yes, gopher level, but was part of, and the agenda he knew about, that network was going to change the world in the way that he described. And if you look at what he said, and I detail it in my books, and at length in one called Phantom Self, he was not only right with the hindsight of all these decades in terms of theme, but in terms of fine detail. Anyway, here's the clip from the talk, which puts this news story into its true context and explains why it's actually happening.
So then we go to sustainable cities, because that's where the people are supposed to go when they're forced off the land. And the human settlement zones are planned to be tightly populated with very small apartments, which are happening all the time, where people are forced together and they're under constant 24/7 surveillance, because they can be in that situation. This is the mayor of, as then was, Michael Bloomberg in New York, announcing the creation of 165,000 units in New York, and the living space in these units is between the two yellow lines, 30 feet by 10 feet. And this is what they plan in the Hunger Games Society human settlement zones, and it's happening everywhere. One of the ticks, as I've gone around the world on my checklist, is this, and it's everywhere. Mini prisons and micro apartments built across America in the name of sustainability. This is the Agenda 21-2030. Warning over micro homes that are barely larger than a jail cell. That's in Britain. Agenda 21, city officials, developers recommend coffin apartments for the middle class. This is in Australia. It's one of them in Australia. And of course, I understand why they have them in Australia, because they haven't got enough land, have they? This is New Zealand, just the width of a guy. And this is a UN New Urban Agenda meeting in 2016 in Quito, Ecuador, where they were discussing this very plan. And this is a very good depiction by an American artist called David Dees of what the human settlement zones are supposed to be like under total surveillance. And this is what Richard Day said in 1969. Privately owned housing would become a thing of the past. The cost of housing and financing housing would gradually be made so high that most people couldn't afford it. Young people would be more and more becoming renters, particularly in apartments and condominiums. People would not be able to buy homes, and gradually more and more of the population would be forced into small apartments which would not accommodate very many children. Again, another tick all over the world. Most people in their 20s and 30s will never buy a home. That was Australia. Young people in UK increasingly giving up on owning a home. Obama's America, 1/3 of millennials broke, single, living at home. Our homeless figures rising because of housing crisis. That is in Sweden. And this is a story from this week highlighting the incredible cost of buying a home in cities in the United States. Exactly as he said. But he went on. This is the next stage. Ultimately, people would be assigned where they would live, and it would be common to have non-family members living with you. This by way of your not knowing just how far you could trust anybody. This would all be under the control of a central housing authority. Have this in mind. When they ask how many bedrooms in your house, how many bathrooms in your house, do you have a finished game room? This information is personal and of no national interest to government under our existing constitution, but you'll be asked those questions.
And of course, we have been asked those questions. People can stay in denial, and of course the mainstream media and the mainstream everything is in constant denial of the fact that there is a global agenda. And events are not random, but have been planned not even for decades, but for far longer than that. This is why Aldous Huxley could be so accurate with his book Brave New World, published in 1932. It's why George Orwell could be so accurate in his book published in 1948. It's because they had access to what this projected agenda was, and so those books were not entirely from their imagination, but were based on an idea of where the world was being taken. Richard Day accessed that same knowledge from another perspective, and therefore was able to be so incredibly accurate in 1969 about so many things that are happening now. And the Maastricht talk, which you saw a clip of there, is available at davidicke.com, more than 10 hours of it. And people say, why 10 hours? Why do you talk for so long? Because in the end, everything connects to everything else. And the society transforming changes and events are not random. They're reported in the mainstream media as random. That's why they tell you, at least to a point, what is happening, but they don't tell you why it's happening. Why? Because most of them don't even know, and those who do know are not saying. But events are not random that change society. They're long planned. And so you can connect this subject of people finding it ever more difficult to buy a home to manipulated wars, to the takeover by technology, the takeover by AI, economic collapses. All these things connect. And when you put them into context, it's, whoa, so that's what's going on. But people are pushed away from this understanding by this constant mantra from the mainstream everything about conspiracy theorists and conspiracy theories. But you know what they never ask? Is what is being said true? Never ask that. Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. But it's really strange. These apparent conspiracy theories, which was a term introduced widely by the CIA in the 60s to discredit people questioning the Kennedy assassination because they didn't want people to know what really happened there. But these conspiracy theories keep turning out to be true. Because what is suggested is the agenda keeps on happening. And this story is just one example of endless examples. So people can stay in denial, and the mainstream media, of course, mainstream everything will stay in denial longer than anybody. But the time is coming, and more people are seeing it now. This is why they're trying to shut down the free flow of information on the internet, because they see the effect it's having on people in looking at the world in a different way. People are beginning to look at the world and say, hold on a minute, these conspiracy theories make more sense than what we've been told before. But the time is coming for more and more people, and even eventually people working in the mainstream everything and the mainstream media, when they're going to have to face the fact that there is a global agenda on a scale and driven by a network that would blow their bloody mind. So here's just one example today of what I'm talking about. And there are many more that I'll cover week after week after week, because this information has to get out there before the door finally slams shut on human freedom.